The morning they told Callum to leave, he did not argue. He stood in the kitchen of the house he had lived in for 22 years, a house where he had fixed the plumbing twice and rebuilt the back porch with his own hands. And the decision was final, and there was no version of this conversation that ended differently. Raymond said this the way a man says something he has rehearsed. He kept his eyes somewhere near Callum's left shoulder. He never looked at his face. Callum's wife had been buried 11 days earlier, and she had spent the last 14 months of her life fighting a cancer that moved through her quietly and fast, the way some things move when they know they cannot be stopped. Callum had been beside her for all of it. He had slept in hospital chairs so often that a particular nurse in the oncology ward had started leaving a folded blanket on the windowsill for him. She carried alone because no drug was strong enough to reach all of it. He had not left her side. And now Raymond, who had visited twice during those 14 months, was standing in Callum's kitchen, telling him that the house belonged to the Aldercott family estate, and that legal counsel had reviewed the situation, and Callum had no standing claim. Callum asked one question. He asked whether Vera had left anything for him. A letter, a note, a message of any kind. Raymond said no. Callum nodded. He looked out the window at the yard, where Birch was sitting in the dry grass, watching the door the way Birch always watched the door when Callum was inside. The dog was 9 years old and mostly gray around the muzzle now, with deep amber eyes that always seemed to be calculating something. Callum said he would need a few hours to gather his things. Raymond said he could have the afternoon. That was how it ended. No shouting, no confrontation, no scene that anyone watching from outside would have recognized as a man losing everything, not where any of them could see. What Callum heard was, before any of this, was not complicated. He was a man who had grown up in a modest house in a small town in rural Montana, the son of a mechanic and a school librarian, two people who had very little money and a very clear understanding of what mattered. His father had told him once that a man who does not panic under pressure is worth 10 men who do. He had carried both of those things his whole life, who ran one of the largest cattle operations in the county and treated every room he entered like a room that had been waiting for him. Vera was standing slightly apart from her father, reading something in a small notebook, and she was the most self-contained person Callum had ever seen in a crowded space. He found a reason to stand near her. They talked for an hour about nothing important. She laughed twice at things he said, and both times it surprised her, as if she had not expected to. They were married 2 years later. The Aldercott family had not been pleased. Gerald made his position clear, without ever stating it directly, which was his particular talent. There were comments at dinners. There were conversations that stopped when Callum entered a room. Raymond, 10 years older than Vera, and the eldest son and heir, a parent of everything Gerald had built, because Vera had asked him not to. She had said, once, near the beginning, that her family was like a weather system, and the best strategy was not to fight the wind, but to know when to come inside. He had respected that. Was what Vera had been doing while he came inside. He did not know that yet. He would find out, but not today. Today, he had 3 hours and a truck and a dog and a life to fit into whatever space those 3 hours allowed. He packed what he could carry. Clothes, his father's watch, which had stopped working years ago, but which Callum wound every morning anyway out of something he could not name. A photograph of Vera, taken on a hiking trail in Wyoming, years before the illness, her hair loose and her eyes bright and her hand raised against the sun. His tools, which filled 2 large metal cases, and which no one in the Aldercott family had ever shown the slightest interest in claiming. He did not take the furniture, because it was not his to take. He took a small wooden box from the back of the bedroom closet, a box Vera had kept locked. When he carried the last load out to the truck, Raymond was standing on the porch watching. Belinda was somewhere inside. Their adult son, a 24-year-old named Trevor, who had inherited his father's eyes and his grandfather's posture, was leaning against the fence with his phone out, doing something that required his complete and obvious indifference to the scene in front of him. Callum tied down the last of his gear in the truck bed. He called Birch, who jumped into the cab with the practiced ease of a dog who knew exactly where he belonged. He drove away and did not look in the rearview mirror. He had $63 in his wallet, a quarter tank of gas, and no plan. He had a cousin named Dex in a town called Farwell, 2 hours north, who had always been decent to him and who had texted after Vera's funeral to say that if Callum ever needed anything. Birch sat in the passenger seat with his chin on the window frame, watching the landscape move past with the focused attention of a dog who finds the world genuinely interesting. Callum drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on Birch's back. He had discovered, during Vera's illness, that there is a kind of exhaustion that goes past thought. He was deep in that territory. He stopped once for gas and to let Birch out. While the dog moved through the dry grass along the shoulder, Callum stood beside the pump and looked at the sky, specifically the way she said his name, Callum, with the emphasis slightly on the second syllable, just slightly, in a way no one else had ever said it. He had never told her that he noticed. He thought about that. He got back in the truck. He drove. Dex lived in a house that was smaller than it looked from the road, which Callum had always appreciated about it, who raised a small herd of beef cattle and grew beans in the summer and drove a truck that was older than Callum's by at least 10 years. He did not ask questions that night. That was one of the best things about Dex. He had a quality that most people develop only through serious loss, which was the ability to understand that some things do not need to be talked about right away, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can give a person is the permission not to explain themselves. They ate. They watched some television. Birch slept on the kitchen floor and twitched his legs in whatever dogs chase in their sleep. Callum went to bed in the small back room and lay in the dark and thought about the wooden box still wrapped in the flannel shirt in his bag. He had not opened it. He was not ready. He stayed at Dex's place for 3 weeks. He helped with the cattle. He fixed a section of fence that had needed fixing since the previous spring. He rebuilt a gate that Dex had been propping shut with a length of rebar for 2 seasons. He did not think about the future very much, because the future felt like a room he was not ready to enter, and then retiring to his spot to sleep while the actual work happened. He was not a working dog anymore, if he ever had been. He was a companion in the oldest sense of the word, a presence that made solitude something other than loneliness. It was on the 18th day that Callum finally opened the box. He did it in the evening, sitting on the tailgate of his truck with Birch beside him, while Dex was inside watching the news. Inside there were several folded papers, a photograph he had never seen, and a sealed envelope with his name written on the front in Vera's handwriting. He sat for a very long time looking at the envelope. Birch leaned against his leg. Callum opened the photograph first. She was smiling in the way she smiled when she was keeping a secret she was proud of. On the back of the photograph, in her handwriting, were 3 words. "You'll find it." He sat with that for a while. Then he unfolded the papers. They were legal documents. His name, not the Aldercott family estate. His name alone. He read the address twice. It was a piece of land he knew. 23 acres of rough, brushy ground on the eastern edge of the Aldercott property. There was an old root cellar on the north end, half collapsed from some earlier era of the property's history, that Vera used to walk to when she wanted to be alone and think. She had walked there with Callum twice, early in their marriage. She had transferred the deed to Callum's name 14 months ago, 1 month after her diagnosis. He sat with that for a very long time. Then he opened the envelope. She had probably written it over several sessions. There were places where the ink color was slightly different, where she had set it down and come back. He read it slowly. He read it twice. Vera had known, from the beginning, what her family was. She had known what her father thought of Callum, and why. Not because Callum was not enough, but because Callum was never going to be controllable. And control was the only currency her father had ever trusted. And Callum had never needed anything from him, and that had made Gerald hate him in the deep, quiet way that proud men hate the things they cannot move. She had known what Raymond was doing with the estate, the legal arrangements that had been made over the years without her full understanding, the documents she had signed at family meetings that she later realized had been structured to minimize her individual rights within the estate. The attorney's name was in the letter. The 23 acres on the eastern edge of the property had been registered in Vera's name as an individual parcel, separate from the main estate, decades ago, when Gerald had drawn up a property survey and dismissed that portion as essentially worthless. And he had not thought about it in 30 years. Vera had not forgotten it. She had transferred it to Callum's name quietly, legally, months before she died, with the full knowledge that her family would never notice until it was too late, because they had never noticed it to begin with. She wrote in a letter that she was sorry she had not told him sooner. She wrote that she had been protecting him in the only way she knew how, which was to keep him outside the family's orbit until she could build him a door of his own. She wrote that she had spent the last year of her life making sure he would have something when she was gone, because she knew what would happen after, and she could not bear to leave him with nothing. She wrote that the land might be worth something now. She wrote that he should talk to a geologist, and that the survey had found something of significant interest in the eastern parcel, the parcel that Gerald had dismissed, the parcel that was now Callum's. Gerald had not known that. The survey had been comprehensive, but the report had been filed away and apparently never fully reviewed, because the parcel it concerned was the one he had given away for nothing and never thought about again. Vera had found the report in her father's filing cabinet one afternoon while he was out. She had made a copy. It was in the box. He called the attorney the next morning, simply and without decoration. She said she had been expecting to hear from him. She said that the transfer of the deed was clean and fully legal and had been registered with the county more than a year ago. She said that in her professional opinion, the Aldercott estate had no grounds to contest it, and that if they tried, she said she had also been in contact with a resources attorney, and that based on the mineral survey Vera had provided her, the eastern parcel had been independently assessed in the previous spring. She said the assessment was significant. Callum asked what significant meant in specific terms. She told him. Birch was asleep in his patch of morning sun. She did. He looked out the kitchen window at the flat blue Montana sky and thought about Vera smiling in front of a half-collapsed stone building with 3 words written on the back of the photograph. You'll find it. He sat there for a very long time after he hung up the phone. He did not go immediately to the land. He waited 2 days. He needed to understand what he was feeling before he went, because he knew that standing on it would change something in him, and he wanted to be ready for that. Callum spent 6 hours going through the documents, the deed, the mineral survey. The specific minerals involved had become dramatically more valuable in the previous decade due to changes in manufacturing technology. The eastern parcel of the old Aldercott survey, the 23 acres of brushy nothing that Gerald had given his daughter as a throwaway birthday gesture when she was 19 years old, sat directly above a deposit that preliminary assessments valued in the 8-figure range. Callum was a man who had spent most of his adult life comfortable but never wealthy. A man who understood money in the language of practical things, of what a fence cost and what a truck cost, and whether there was enough to fix the water heater without waiting until spring. Vera had known. She had found out quietly, and instead of telling her family, who would have restructured the estate instantly to reclaim the parcel. She had transferred it to her husband's name and kept the secret until she died. The audacity of that. The patience of it. The love of it. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes and breathed for a while. On the second day, he drove out to the land. He went alone, except for Birch. He had to approach from the south road, which was not the route he had used in the years when they had walked here from the main house, and the terrain from that direction was rougher than he remembered, the brush denser, the ground uneven and dry. He parked at the road's edge and walked in through scrub grass and juniper the land was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that is not empty but full, the way some silences are actually the accumulation of a great deal that cannot be heard. Grasshoppers moved through the dry grass. A hawk was working a thermal somewhere above the ridge to the west. Who understood that good work outlasts the person who does it, and the structure, though half collapsed at the back or a wall had given way, was still largely intact at the front. The door was gone. A rusted iron hinge was all that remained of it, bolted to a cedar post that had grayed with age. Birch went straight to it. Not just interested, purposeful. The dog went to the entrance of the root cellar and stood there and looked back at Callum, and then looked into the dark interior, and then looked back at Callum again, with the expression of a dog who is communicating something very specific and is mildly frustrated that humans are so slow. Callum stood still for a moment. Then he walked forward and crouched down at the entrance and looked inside. It was dark, but not completely dark, because part of the back wall was open to the sky and a bar of afternoon light fell across the interior from that angle. The cellar was mostly empty. There were remnants of old wooden shelving along one wall, rotted into uselessness. The earthen floor was dry. Against the far wall, just inside the bar of light, was a stone shelf that had been built into the wall's construction, recessed and narrow, the kind of thing you would not see unless you were looking for it. On the shelf was a metal box. It had not been there for decades. It had been placed there deliberately, recently enough that the dust around it was disturbed in a circle of about a foot's radius. Callum did not know the combination. He sat back on his heels and looked at the box for a moment. Birch pressed against his side. Then he thought about the wooden box. He had kept the key, which was on a ring with the key to his truck, and one other key he had carried for years, a small brass key he had never known the purpose of. He took the key ring from his pocket. The small brass key fit the box perfectly. Inside the fireproof safe, there were 3 things. The first was a USB drive. The second was a folded sheet of paper. The third was something Callum had not seen in 20 years, something he had assumed was lost or given away or simply forgotten, in the way some things from early in a life get forgotten. It was a photograph of himself and Vera from the second summer of their marriage. They were standing in front of a fence on a property he could not immediately identify, both of them squinting against the sun, both of them laughing at something happening outside the frame. He was 22 years younger. On the back of the photograph, she had written, "I knew from the first summer. I just needed you to catch up." He sat down on the earthen floor of the root cellar. It was a note, shorter than the letter, written the way you write something when you do not have a great deal of time. It said, "The drive has everything. Elise has a copy. Don't let them make you feel small. You never owed them anything. You only ever owed me, and I am square with you." It said, "Tell Birch. I said he was a good boy." It said, "I love you. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. You deserved longer." Who was completely calm because they have already thought through every possible version of a conflict and prepared for all of them. She was also, Callum would discover, one of the few people who had known Vera in her full complexity, the Vera who existed separately from her family's idea of her. Piece by piece, an exit that she would never personally use but that she had designed with great love for the person she was leaving behind. The mineral rights assessment was filed. The deed was confirmed. Callum agreed to a development contract 3 months later. He had time now and patience, and Vera had taught him something he had not known he still needed to learn, which was that the people who love you can see further ahead than you can see yourself. And sometimes love looks like a woman spending 14 months of her dying, quietly building you a future she would not live to see. Raymond found out first from the county recorder's office. Because he had commissioned a full title search of the estate following Gerald's death the previous year, part of the routine consolidation of the family's assets. The title search flagged the eastern parcel as separately titled. Raymond called Elise. Elise was polite. She was thorough. She referenced the date of transfer, the registration number, the chain of title, and the names on 3 different legal documents. She noted the date of Gerald's original gift of the parcel to Vera. She noted the date of Vera's transfer to Callum. She noted that the transfer had been completed, registered, and legally finalized 14 months prior to Raymond's inquiry. Vera. She said she would be happy to provide the complete documentation package if Raymond wished to review it. Raymond said quietly that he would be in contact. He was never in contact, because there was nothing to say. Because Vera had built it that way on purpose, built it so that there was nothing to contest, nothing to negotiate, nothing to undo. She had been the quietest person in every room she had ever shared with her family, and she had used that understanding to build something they could not touch. Trevor, the young man who had stood at the fence with his phone while Callum loaded his truck, was reportedly furious. He did not feel much about the Haldocott family at all, which was its own kind of freedom. He built a house on the eastern parcel, not a large house, not a house that announced itself. A single-story house with deep eaves and a wide porch facing west, where the sunsets came in long and slow in summer, and a kitchen with good light in the morning. He hired local labor, not because he could not have hired anyone he wanted, but because the men who came to work were men who worked the way he understood, with skill and few words and an instinct for what a structure needed to last. He picked the location himself, about 200 feet east of the root cellar, which he had repaired and cleaned out and kept because he was not a man who destroyed things that had history. Birch supervised the construction from a patch of shade near the south fence line. He still accompanied Callum on the morning walk every day. The USB drive, which Callum had viewed with Elise, contained a collection of files Vera had assembled over the previous 14 months. There were scanned copies of the mineral survey. There were scanned copies of the family's estate documents. She had sent copies to Elise. There was also a folder simply labeled "For You," which contained no legal documents, which contained instead a collection of things Vera had written across the last year of her life, short pieces, sometimes only a paragraph, sometimes several pages, that were not letters and not journals, but something in between. A list titled "Things I Want You to Know," which was 12 pages long and which he read in a single sitting. One evening with the lamp on and the windows dark and Birch asleep at his feet, he read it many times after that. Some of it was practical. Some of it was funny, in the specific way Vera was funny, which was quiet and dry, and usually landed 3 seconds after she said it. Some of it was the kind of thing you can only say to a person when you are past the point of it mattering whether you say it or keep it, when the calculus of vulnerability has shifted entirely and you have nothing left to protect. She wrote about the day she decided to marry him. She wrote about the period in their marriage when things had been hard and she had been distant, and she had never adequately explained why. And she explained it now, not to justify it, but because she thought he deserved to understand it. She wrote about watching him during her illness, the things he did that he thought she did not see, and she listed them. The small, precise acts of care that make up a life alongside someone. The glass of water left on her knitstand before she woke, the way he turned down the television volume when she drifted into sleep, the morning he had spent 2 hours in the garden pulling weeds because she had said once, weeks earlier, that it bothered her to see them, and she did not have the strength to address it herself. She wrote, "You think you have to be big to matter. You think love has to announce itself. You never understood that what you did quietly was the loudest thing I ever heard." The first full summer in the new house, Callum had a porch built off the south side. In addition to the main west-facing porch, the south porch was smaller. It faced the root cellar and the line of juniper beyond it and the rough open land that rolled east toward the horizon. He put a chair on it. On the evenings when the day had been good, or the evenings when it had been hard, in the specific way that grief goes on being hard, even when you are also doing well, he sat in the chair on the south porch and watched the land go dark. Birch was usually beside him. Callum was not a man who talked much. He was not a man who needed to. He had learned, over 22 years with a woman who also chose words carefully, that some kinds of communication move below the surface of language, often with a gratitude that had no particular direction, gratitude of the diffuse kind that moves through you the way warmth moves through a room. In a family where no one had ever looked at him with anything but assessment and finding him wanting, she had seen him, actually seen him, an amount that removed every practical anxiety from Callum's life permanently. He was not extravagant with it. He gave a significant portion to the Agricultural Scholarship Fund at the State University in Vera's name. He paid off Dex's remaining mortgage as a surprise. He hired one person to help him manage the development contracts, a young woman from a nearby town who was methodical and straight-talking and who treated him without ceremony, which he appreciated. And that kind of life does not need to be recorded because it is already happening constantly in real time, which is all any life actually is. It was an evening in early fall. The light was going horizontal, the kind of amber that turns everything it touches briefly perfect. He had been out all day, and he was tired in the good way, the body-tired way that comes from actual work. And there were mornings when he did not jump immediately from his bed the way he used to. But he still walked the fence line. He still went where Callum went. He still stopped at intervals and looked at things with those amber eyes that always seemed to be working something out. They came past the root cellar, and Birch paused at the entrance, the way he sometimes did, not urgently, just noting it. The sun dropped behind the ridge. The sky stayed light for a long time after, the way it does in fall, holding color the way something holds warmth after the source of heat is gone. Callum sat in the chair with his hand on Birch's back. He thought about something Vera had written in the 12-page list. Near the end, in what he believed was one of the later editions based on the ink, she had written, "I hope you find out what peace feels like when nothing is trying to take it away. You never got to feel that. I wanted you to have it." He sat with the sky going through its colors above the land that was his, the land she had given him, the land she had quietly fought for while she was losing everything else. And he felt what she had described, a slow sweep against the boards. The land was quiet. He stayed there until the last color was gone and the first stars were out, and then he stayed a little longer because there was nowhere else he needed to be, and because the person who had understood him best had made sure of that, the kind that keeps building for you after it no longer has the luxury of time, the kind that leaves keys in pockets and photographs in boxes and letters en route, sellers and legal documents in the hands of careful attorneys. That kind of love does not end when the person is gone. It just takes a different form. It becomes the house you are standing in, the land beneath your feet, the document with your name on it, the chair on the porch, the dog beside you, the voice that you carry in you now, instead of hearing from across a room. That kind of love does not end. The stars came out one at a time, then all at once, the way they always do, the way some things happen, quietly and then completely. It was enough. It was, he understood, exactly enough.